Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. And thank you so much, Malaprops, for hosting this reading. I'm going to start by reading just a little bit from the introduction to A Harp in the Stars, just to give you a little bit of an idea of my thinking about the lyric essay before we start hearing some. Lyric essays try something daring. They rely more on intuition than exposition. They often use image more than narration. They question more than answer. But despite all this looseness, the lyric essay still has the responsibilities of any essay: to try to figure something out, to play with ideas, to show a shift in thinking, however subtle. The whole of a lyric essay adds up to more than the sum of its parts. Lyric essays require a kind of passion, a commitment to weirdness in the face of convention, a willingness to risk confusion, a comfort with outsider status. When I'm writing a lyric essay, I'm not worried about what it is or what to call it. But when I started teaching lyric essays, I needed to put words to the form, to try to define it, to make it at least a little more accessible and understandable, even as I kept running into contradictions in my own thinking. Sometimes I enjoyed the lyric essay's elusiveness. Other times I felt like I was following a set of backward hoofprints. But the lyric essay's wily capaciousness is among its strengths. I came to define a lyric essay as a piece of writing with a visible, standout, unusual structure that explores, forecasts, or gestures to an idea in an unexpected way. But about that visible, standout, unusual structure, those gestured to ideas, lyric essays are tricky. If you try to mount one to a spreading board, it's likely to dodge the pin and fly away. If you try to press one between two slides, it might find a way to ooze down your sleeve. And if you try to set it within a taxonomy, it will pose the same problems as the platypus, a mammal, but one that lays eggs. Semi-aquatic, living in both water and on land, and venomous, a trait that belongs mostly to reptiles and insects. It will run away if on land, its gait that of a furry alligator, or swim off in the undulating way of beavers. Either way, it can threaten you with a poisoned spur before it ripples off. In this anthology, and in this reading, you will find a wide range of thinking about the lyric essay, how it can leap, search, wander, hint at, unravel, excavate, and create, how it can both replicate and explain trauma, how it comes from or leaves behind fiction and poetry, how it acts like a panther, an iceberg, an on-ramp, an artichoke, how it's defined and how it can never be defined, how it tries and how it delivers, how it sings and how it plays. Orpheus's lyre accompanied him through all sorts of adventures. It traveled with him as deep as the underworld, and after his death was sent by Zeus to live among the stars. You can see its constellation, Lyra, in the summer months if you live in the northern hemisphere, the winter months if you live in the southern. This feels like an apt metaphor for the lyric essay. The stars are there, but their shape is what your mind brings to them. So I'm very excited to hear this set of lyric essays tonight. The first will be by Michael Dowdy, who is a poet, critic, essayist, and editor. His books include the collection of poems Herbally, the study of Latinx poetry Broken Souths, and as co-editor with Claudia Rankine, the critical anthology Poetics of Social Engagement. He teaches at the University of South Carolina, and for more information, you can visit his website, michael-dowdy.com. So thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Randon. Thank you to Malaprops, a place I've read before in person. This is not quite as good, but still it's lovely to be here. And thank you to Eric and Sayantani. I'm excited to read with you all today. My lyric essay is called Elementary Primer, and it proceeds through the alphabet. I'm going to have to skip through some of the letters in the alphabet for each entry because of time constraints. And I will say before I start reading that this essay comes with a content warning gun violence. Elementary primer. A, dear daughter, when later this month you begin first grade, remember your letters and numbers, a delight or two, the words of others, the pain of mothers and brothers, all seared onto the pallbearer's atlas of your country, like 10,000 crossroads. Blacksburg, where I was born and lived for 24 years, where your beloved grandparents remain, were a college student. He'd been a hostile presence in the poetry workshop with Nikki Giovanni, the poet who penned a ferocious poem after the assassination of MLK 39 years earlier, the poet who knew rage when she saw it, murdered 32, including your Aunt R's best friend, a dancer, this 5 years before you were born on a September 11th in New York City. Columbine, where when I was living in Blacksburg at the turn of one brutal century into another, working at the university whose name would be reduced 8 years later to the worst mass shooting on our atlas of infamy, two students gunned down 13 at their high school. Or Charleston, just down I-26 from where we live in Columbia, where a white supremacist who was born in our city killed 9 Black parishioners. You've never been inside a church, but I think you get me on the gravity. Where the poet Nikki Finney wrote years before the shooting that the slaying of Black people was regular, just like summer come and winter go. Dayton, where the night before we dropped you off in the mountains for your first overnight camp, another white man took 9 lives, including his sisters, where his former classmates testified in the days after that he hated girls like you and women like you may become. El Paso, where 2 days before we left you at this sort of sleepaway camp I never dreamed of going to as a child, a white supremacist drove 9 hours from Dallas and at a Walmart ended the lives of 22 Latinxes and Mexican nationals. Fragment, the little by little suddenly, wrote the French philosopher Maurice Blanchot in the writing of The Disaster. Blanchot, who survived the Nazi concentration camps, who your father intones today as he considers how time can collapse, expand, and burst. Gather the fragments left over so that nothing will be wasted. So says the Gospel of John. So says the book I haven't picked up in decades and won't now that I'm being urged to offer my prayers for the 22 in El Paso and the 9 in Dayton, the 3 murdered a week earlier at the Gilroy Garlic Festival by another white supremacist, already, apparently, prayed into their graves. Gather the fragments, gather them and let them groan. Las Vegas, where at a concert 58 died under a white man's reign of terror, where when you were 5, the topography of the map of infamy gained in altitude. Look into the dark heart, the poet C.D. Wright implored us, and you will see what the dark eats other than your heart. Muriel Rukeyser, whose words I return to more than any others, whose sentence, "These roads will take you into your own country," resounds more than 80 years after she typed them. Rukeyser, who wrote the phrase, "A landscape mirrored in these men." Your landscape mirrored in these men. Orlando, where in the city you know only for Disney World, where your mother and I refused to go, where your grandparents took you for your 5th birthday. In the city, the poet Sandra Simons in her book, Orlando, calls the city of dented sun, dented hotels, shiny and sad, remote as money. We're at a club called Pulse. You've never been inside a club, but I think in your dancing bones, you get me on the gravity. 49, most of them LGBTQ plus and Latinx, were murdered by a man who'd learned to despise the beautiful bodies inhaling and exhaling all around him. Pittsburgh, where in a synagogue an anti-Semite white supremacist killed 12 at prayer, where my friend, the poet Mauricio Kilwine Guevara, who grew up there, once wrote, "I say, Captain, look at your old river, old Monongahela. Even John the Baptist would not wade in that water. But wade we must, without wetsuits or saviors." Ross Gay, who proclaims in the Book of Delights, the laughing snort among the most emphatic evidences of delight, because at the apex of your raucous jibe, play, and prance, your snort carries me for a moment, one toe top into the world I want. Sutherland Springs, Texas, in a church, 26, or Stoneman Douglas, a school, 17, or Santa Fe, Texas, in a school, 10. Or Sandy Hook, where in an elementary school, 27 were slaughtered, 20 of them kindergartners by a young white man. The night after the shooting at 2 a.m., our live-in super, another young white man, broke into our Brooklyn apartment in a frenzy, presumably triggered by the massacre, demanding to touch your sleeping 3-month-old body. Unarmed in this country, what choice did we have? Underwear, of which the coup's Boots Riley wraps in wear clean draws, telling his daughter, wear clean draws every day, 'cause things may fall the wrong way. You'll be lying there waiting for the ambulance, and your underwear got holes in shit. Know this, A, my wrong ways will not be yours, nor will my ambulance. Soon the sirens may churn endlessly like this summer's cicadas. The sirens, like summer, may come and never go. With my harvesting stick, I will stir the clouds. So declares the Tohono O'odham poet Ophelia Zepeda. Tohono O'odham means desert people of the Sonora near Tucson, where the Congresswoman Gabby Giffords survived a white gunman's bullets on land stolen by men like these murderer men, men who look like your father. Desert poet, let the clouds burst. Let them wash us away. Let them cleanse the wounded, whom I haven't counted here. Their caregivers, the mourners and undertakers, the dying planet's pallbearers, those bearers of gloom. X, the unknown variable, the next crossroads to be branded on the map, the target I hallucinate on your back. Yeti coolers, which in our state of hunt clubs are all the rage among white men of shooting age. When I lop the eye from the Yeti's stinging tail, you're left with yet, a delightful word. Yet signals our turn, a clawing back, claiming ground from those who kill. You and I and your mother on our only child island, join in an archipelago of yet, the word that portends the end of the sentence. Z, the letter, doesn't appear once on the Wikipedia page, mass shootings in the United States. Not a single word includes a Z, no place name, no given name, surname, or nickname, no endnote source. Z, the first letter of the country, you and your comrades, the young, the zealous, the restless, the fed up and relentless, must build on the ruins of the one you've been given. Dearest A, you must begin at the end. Thank you.
Oh, I need a minute. That's so powerful. And even more hearing you read it out loud. It's magic for me to hear these essays read out loud. I've read them many times on the page, but to hear them in your own voices is very moving. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Our next reader is Eric Tran, who is the author of The Gutter Spread Guide to Prayer, winner of the 2019 Autumn House Rising Writer Prize, which was featured in the Rumpus Poetry Book Club. His work appears in Poetry Daily, Poetry Northwest, Missouri Review Poem of the Week, and elsewhere. He is a resident physician in psychiatry in Asheville, North Carolina. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you, Randon, for helping organize this. Thank you, Malaprop's my local bookstore and one of my favorite places to be in town and in life. Thank you, Michael and Sayantani as well. There's a line from Michael's essay that I underlined that says, fragment, the little by little suddenly. And I think of times like readings like this where we often think like, oh, it's virtual form, it's not as good, but I think too like how much I feel like a fragment sort of floating in the world, and now sort of suddenly I get to be joined with all of you, and it feels certainly a lot less lonely in the world. I'm going to read a braided essay called Prophecy, and what a braided essay means is there's different threads to it, and there's different very small chunks of text that will sort of jump between each other pretty suddenly. They're demarcated by asterisks, but since I can't make the asterisk sound, I'm just going to hold up my hand like this, and this will also This will also mark a time in the text at which I will be reading something, but it's meant to be read backwards. As a little bit of a primer, this was written the first year of my psychiatry residency, where I was an intern in the psychiatric unit. Prophecy. A patient says his God is almighty, and most of the staff agrees with salvation and devotion. He says his God will crush us underfoot, and we have nothing to say in return. The next day, he focuses on his healing God powers. He passes me in the hall, his hands in prayer. Be blessed, not stressed. I admit I've been thinking a lot about comic book heroes, their movie and TV adaptations. A sentient android constructs a family of robots. A young gay couple, one alien, one wizard, both nearly omnipotent, break up again and again. A detective with super strength has PTSD from an abusive relationship. I describe them to my best friend Z, who says of them, poorly veiled metaphors for suffering. Almost no titular superheroes have powers to heal others. If they do, it's one tooth and a smile, alongside other powers like spellcasting, flight, prophecy. To cut to the chase, Z dies unexpectedly a month before I start residency. One night he texts me that he's having intractable vomiting and he's not asking for advice, but I suggest ginger tea, and then he's in the hospital and then he's gone. The patient is only in his mid-20s, but he's been hospitalized more times than my geriatric patients. In some ways, it's frustrating how rote the story seems. In other ways, it's like returning to a book I haven't figured out yet. The notes bled through, a spine cracked under my fingers. In some religions, the laying on of hands is the act of bestowing divine favor or healing through physical touch. Z suffered from depression and anxiety. I only ever gently pushed him to go to therapy, to stay on medication, because I thought all he needed was a little more time. Because the patient won't take medication and threatens staff, we consider forced injections, euphemistically, non-emergent forced medication. He wanders the hall, proselytizing our doom. We hope for improvement, like we can will it into being. In psychiatry, we call restraining someone by physical touch a therapeutic hold. I only know of one contemporary comic hero whose main ability is to heal. The first time he heals, his skin becomes gold, like he's wrapped in tinsel. The first time he kills, his skin becomes a metallic black. Even when he reverts, there's a black spot that moves around his body, always staying a little bit out of sight. I've ordered force injections before. One patient was just hours out of a meth binge and screamed that we might as well kill her. I imagined again and again all the details. The needle, the security, the screaming that would live in her nightmares. But the morning after her injection, the patient woke up and poured milk into her bran flakes and told me she didn't remember anything. Some patients say, you can't help me. You can't help me. And I think they're right. Most doctors I know didn't go into medicine because of the field's miracles. More often, it's for the loved ones who died of cancer, pneumonia, suicide, whom medicine failed. One of Z's favorite comic characters casts spells by speaking them backward. Once, her enemies shot a hole through her voice box, and to save herself, she wrote, "Heal me," with the ink of her own hot blood. We finally decide to give the patient his forced injection. And the patient doesn't ask us what's going on, but sits calmly on the bed. He faces the window, which in the mornings show a line of mountains holding up the sun. He asks us to pray for him, and a nurse holds his hand. Dear Heavenly Father, please help us get well. God help me. I miss him so much. Thank you all so much for letting me read.
Oh, thank you so much, Eric. It's just magic to hear these read. It's a different kind of experience than reading it on the page. And I hope our audience gets to have both experiences as well. Thank you again. Our next reader is Sayantani Dasgupta, who is the author of Women Who Misbehave, Fire Girl, Essays on India, America, and the In-Between, a finalist for the 2016 Forward Indies Awards, and the chapbook The House of Nails, Memories of a New Delhi Childhood. Her writings have appeared in several national and international publications, such as The Rumpus and The Hindu. She teaches in the MFA program at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, and has also taught in India, Italy, and Mexico. Thank you, Sayantani.
Thank you so much, Randon. Thank you, Malaprops. I have only been in North Carolina for 2.5 years now, and living in Wilmington means that, especially living in Wilmington in these last 2.5 years has meant I am either evacuating, running from a hurricane, or I am in front of Zoom at home. So it's not really felt like I'm in North Carolina really. But earlier this year, my husband and I could take a trip to Asheville, and we went to Malaprops because everyone in Wilmington is obsessed with Malaprops. So it was wonderful to actually be there and, of course, buy loads of books. So it's a special kind of thrill to be reading for Malaprops. And Michael, Eric, thank you so much for your beautiful essays. Thank you so much for your beautiful readings. One of the things that I love about essays is how things that seemingly don't go together, like mental illness or superheroes, or just all kinds of things that don't seem to match on the surface. But in the world of essays, our subconscious works as such a beautiful guide and makes them work together. So thank you for bringing all these, connecting all these dots for us. My essay is titled The Boys of New Delhi, and it is a segmented essay, meaning, as the title suggests, that it moves in segments. There are 4 segments in all, and there are some lingering themes from one segment to another. This was a terrifying essay to write in more ways than one, because I think this is easily one of my most vulnerable essays. And earlier today, when I was reading in preparation, I was sort of really doubting the existence of this essay. But then again, that's why we write, right? That's why we tell the stories we do. All right, The Boys of New Delhi. Part 1. Because I was 12, because no one else saw me, because I felt too big in my skin, my legs concrete pillars, and not the statuesque, never-ending sexiness of the girls I envied, but couldn't bring myself to admit. In that New Delhi heat, your music store was one with air conditioning. I'm embarrassed to admit that that's what brought me in the first time, and not the quest for any great music. Remember, I wanted to pay you for the Grammy Awards cassette. When I pulled out the 40-rupee note from my jeans, you chuckled. You grasped the money, shook your head, and slid it right back. That brush of your fingers lived in my jeans for days. You smelled of cigarettes and everything my dad disapproved of. You had broad shoulders and an indigo shirt. Every day as I walked up to your store, I knew you watched me through the tinted screen of your door, in full view of your coworkers. Probably you all laughed a bit at my expense. You were 27, your fingertips carried experience. You had thin lips and I wanted their pinch around mine, the graze of your teeth on my throat. But one day you disappeared. Your coworker said you got married and moved to a new city. That night I cried like an 11-year-old girl and not the 12-year-old woman I thought I had become. Segment 2, compatibility. Once, when I was 13, I asked my friend who was 15 if he would introduce me to his friends in the neighborhood. You know, boys his age, older, smarter, cool. I asked because I remember feeling pretty good about myself that day. School had been fantastic. The kind teachers had been kind. The horrid one hadn't shown up. I had even received a certificate for winning a debate. My best friends and I had gathered at our designated spot under the banyan tree during lunch and laughed hysterically over a classmate's new boyfriend. He insisted on showing his love and devotion by giving her soppy nicknames. No way, we insisted. Our future boyfriends were going to be so much cooler than that. After I returned home from school, I had inaugurated a new black sweater and a purple polka dot skirt. My hair was tousled, but just the right amount. There was that slight nip in the air signaling New Delhi's sweet winter was just around the corner. Spurred by all these good vibes, I made my audacious request. I asked, hey, do you think you could introduce me to some of your friends? I remember how quickly my friend shook his head, how abruptly he said, no, I don't think so. I should have dropped the subject. I should have guessed why he was looking away. Instead, I smoothed my skirt. I touched a black button on my sweater as if it was my lucky charm. I demanded answers. Why not? My friend cleared his throat. He continued to look away. Finally, when he spoke, his voice was low. I had to lean my head toward him. I'm not sure, he said. I'm not sure you will be compatible with any of them. This time, I nodded. I dropped the subject. I knew what he meant. Compatibility was a big word. I was a big girl. Most days, I was ashamed of my body, but confident of other aspects of myself, like my sense of humor, my ability to write well, the solid loyalty I offered my friends. But in that moment, all my qualities went away. He was older, smarter, more knowledgeable. What did I know of his friends, of boys that were almost young men, and what they found compatible? Today, I'm a university professor. I put on a suit of confidence every day, although some days it struggles to sit properly. Semester after semester, I read essays where students write about all the ways they feel ugly in their skin. I have a hard time associating the harsh words they use for themselves with how I see them in the classroom. Confident, stylish, smart. They remind me that underneath our suits, we are all a little beastly. That friend and I are in touch via the occasional email. He's on to his third marriage now. None of the previous marriages lasted for more than 1 year, at best 2. I wonder if he still closes conversations with words like compatibility. I'm going to skip segment 3 in the interest of time, and now segment 4. Kimbhut Kimakar. When I was 17, the boy I dated told me he couldn't believe he was with someone of my shape. He called me Kimbhut Kimakar. The word doesn't mean anything, neither in English nor in Bengali, our mother tongue, but it exists. It's the name of a monster from Abul Tabul, a book of nonsense rhymes penned by Sukumar Ray. I feel certain that the original intent behind the poems and their accompanying illustrations was to entertain children, not hurt teenage girls with brittle confidence. When I was a kid, my mother used to read to me those very same nonsense rhymes. I loved them so much I could recite several of them from memory. Kimbhut Kimakar too had once been among my favorites. And why not? He had the head of a tusked elephant, a wild bushy mane, a long alligator-like tail, the hind legs of a giant bird, and his back and shoulders were covered in feathers. The poem's first line read, this disgusting creature. Now, nearly 20 years later, that boy who once called me Kimput Kimakar is the father to a little girl. I'm friends with him on Facebook, where he routinely posts pictures of his wife and daughter who link their arms with his and smile straight into the camera. Here is a picture of them eating out. There they have gone to the movies. Yesterday they played badminton. Last month they vacationed in Paris. I have never met either his wife or their daughter, but I wonder what names he calls them now, what words they don't repeat when they look into the camera, what echoes they will hear all their lives. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. I feel like we need a beat after all of these. I'm imagining the applause that would happen in person after each reading. I'm imagining that kind of collective that people do. So heartbreaking, but so gorgeously rendered. Thank you so much for reading. I'm going to close out the reading part of our time tonight with another kind of heartbreaking essay. This is a hermit crab essay called "The Heart as a Torn Muscle," and it's told in the form of a medical advice site, like a WebMD entry. So you'll be able to hear some familiar categories, symptoms, self-care, exams and tests, the kinds of things that you would see on a medical advice site. The heart is a torn muscle. Overview. Your heart was already full, but then you saw him, and your heartbeat code, not Morse, but a more insistent pulse. Oh yes, that's him, that one. Not the one, capital T, capital O, the one you already have and deeply love. But of all the people in that large room far from home, he was the one for you. And your heart stretched more than it should have, tore a little, and let him in. Symptoms: swelling, bruising, or redness. The feeling that your lungs contain a higher percentage of oxygen and have somehow grown in their capacity to respire. A heightened sensitivity to glances, postures, gestures, attitudes, and casual remarks from observers. A propensity to blush. Pain at rest, general restlessness, an inability to sleep, fever dreams, sleepwalking, conscious walking, out of your bedroom, out of doors, into the moonlight or an unmown field shrouded in mist and ache or fantasies of same. Pain when the specific muscle is used, when your heart beats to force blood through your femoral arteries, to your iliopsoas muscles, your sartorius muscles, your peroneus muscles, each expanding and contracting to force your legs to walk away from him, from thrill, from all the promise and potential of an alternate future. Inability to use the muscle at all, lethargy, apathy, malaise, especially after having walked away from the one in question. Self-care. Apply ice, cool it. The early application of heat can increase swelling and pain. Note, ice or heat should not be applied to bare skin. Always use a protective layer. Latex only as a very last resort. Clothing is better, or better still, distance, several feet, a separate piece of furniture, a wall, or a building. Ideally, a state line, a continent. Try an anti-inflammatory such as herbal tea or a pro-con list. Cool showers and brisk walks in bracing air may help. Do not take depressants in the form of alcohol or otherwise. Avoid stimulants, caffeine, chocolate, Cheetos. Protect the strained muscle from further injury by refusing to jump into anything. Avoid the activities that cause the strain and other activities that are painful. Compression, hold yourself together. Elevation, rise above. When to seek care. If home remedies bring no relief in 24 hours, call your youngest and most bohemian friend. If you hear a popping sound signifying a break from your primary relationship, the one, capital T, capital O, you truly know and truly love, call your closest and most trusted friend. Exams and tests. Your youngest and most bohemian friend asks, are you going to run away together, tryst in motels, meet up in Paris, open a P.O. box, wear a trench coat, give each other code names, assume another identity? Would he be up for a threesome? Want to use my place? Says it's so romantic, says tell me everything. Your closest and most trusted friend asks, what do you mean met someone? Have you thought this through? Is this choice supporting, adding to, enriching, complicating, marring, degrading, not even leaving a blip on the screen in the way in which you will see your life in the years to come? What will you be left with? Regret, memory, or absolutely nothing? Says time wounds, all heals. Says don't fuck up. Recommended reading: Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, The Bridges of Madison County by Robert James Waller, Time Will Darken It by William Maxwell, The Lone Pilgrim by Laurie Colwin, Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf, The Literal Zone by Andrea Barrett, The End of the Affair by Graham Greene. No horoscopes, no tarot cards or tea leaves. If you must, you may steep yourself in stories of passion and price. Years from now, you can indulge in what ifs. But for now, right now, put your hand to your chest and feel what beats. The only muscle you can't live without needs to stay whole. Thank you.
Thank you, Brandon, for rounding us out with that, those evocative and disturbing and just writings that wrap around us, I guess is the best way I can say it. And I'm so glad to have listened to them by the authors themselves, because you're right, that really does make a difference in how they inflect and what they stress and add to. So I wanted to open it up to this group of writers because you have a lot to say to each other and ask of each other about your writings. And I'd like to start with a question from Eric to Michael. And the question is, and I'm reading these aloud for our audience as well. Michael, your essay imposes a structure to perhaps navigate tragedy. Did you find the content fought with the form at times?
Thank you, Patricia, and thank you, Eric, for the excellent question. And I would say, yes, absolutely. And one of the things that I write about in my meditation in this anthology is that I do the lyric essay when my poems fail, that they're fragments of failed poems, that they didn't work in poetry. They needed a little more space, a little more discursiveness, but they also wanted to retain their fragmentary nature. So yeah, I think so. And again, especially with thinking through this sort of violence, that they were always kind of in tension, the form and the content. And I think that's why this form is so truncated for me. And the second question you ask is about any entry in this essay looks like it could be a standalone essay. And in fact, some of them are. The one about Sandy Hook, for example, is a long essay. And I'm sort of envisioning this essay as the last piece in a longer collection of lyric essays. So in some ways, it's a culmination of thinking and a distillation of it. And then really, I think in a way, a dispersal of whatever conclusions I've come to, an evacuation of them. Thank you. It's a really great question. Really terrific observation.
The second question that Michael was referring to from Eric reads as follows. I feel like any entry in this essay could be a standalone essay. How do you know what is needed to be complete?
It's a great question. I think the answer is I have no idea. I don't know. Sometimes you can't do anymore. And I think that's what I like about the constraints of this form. I wanted to take the alphabet, right, and think about what an elementary primer is about learning your ABCs, and and some of them are a stretch. For example, the one that Eric pointed out in his very generous observation before he began his reading about fragment, the little by little suddenly. I just wanted that word fragment in there as my F, and I want to get Maurice Blanchot in there. So there is that sort of quality where I'm shoehorning in content into the form, and finding out what happens when you shoehorn that content into a tighter form. But I think that comes from just being a poet in part.
And then Eric, you are generating the questions this evening to jump us off, and I appreciate that. That helps us think so much, and also it helps the audience think of other questions too. So it serves a lot of roles there. And so please excuse me, I want to say Sayantani. I hope that's right. Eric had a question for you. I was so curious that the essay titled "The Boys in New Delhi," when the focus is so much on the speaker's body. Can you talk about the tension there, please?
Yeah, Eric, before you said this, this hadn't even crossed my mind that I should even title the essay something else. And not that you're suggesting that the essay should be titled something else. But in my mind, and of course, New Delhi is such a gigantic city, it's 15 million people. But when you are 12 or 13, I guess even older, you are only thinking of yourself and the tragedies of your life and who has hurt you and in what ways. And of course, when you are 12, you don't have all the ways to figure out how to deal with that hurt. So it just lives on forever. So in my head, these instances could not have happened anywhere else. But your question has, of course, suggested and shown me so clearly that this could have happened to any kid in any city of the world. But your own experiences are so singular that they feel, oh, this could not have happened anywhere outside of my specific New Delhi experience. So this is such an illuminating thing to think about for me. I thank you. So I don't know how to answer your question, except that it's made me think of my essay in a way I wasn't expecting.
Well, I love that you interpreted the question that way, because I realize now that I could have emphasized the New Delhi. I think the curious part is it's so much about the speaker's body, but the emphasis is on the boys outside. And I wonder if there's a tension there between thinking about the speaker's body versus titling boys.
Right. And I feel that part of it comes from the fact that I feel they were hurtful. They could have been hurtful even if my body was perfect. So I feel that the emphasis was more on how awful these boys were, with or without my body being part of the conversation. So I don't know if I'm still answering your question at all, but that's where my mind is going right now.
Well, I love that you ended with, I'm not sure if I'm answering this question, because the next question is about ending without answers. And I hope all of you will answer this question. And you can take turns in however way you'd like to, or you don't have to if you don't care to. Each segment ends with wondering and without answers. Can you talk about if you feel like the lyric form is more or less appropriate for this style of thinking and writing? Why not the poser of the question? Maybe the poser of the question would answer first.
I was thinking about Sayantani's essays, because every segment is like, I wonder what is happening with this person. So it is kind of like you finish a segment and it's like they're like very discrete blocks of text, so you want some closure, and yet she's directing you to think like, oh, beyond the current situation, which I really love, because as Michael points out in a later question, like there are discrete blocks of time in Sayantani's essays, and yet she's also pulling from the past and then projecting really far into the future. And I think that's just an incredible thing to do in such a small amount of text. My own thinking about asking more questions than getting answers is that I'm a psychiatrist and my job is to ask more questions than it is to get answers. But I also think, that's the joy of the human experience and the joy of being present is that everything is very confusing and very, at times, very awful. But if you stick with it, it can also be quite lovely too. Like thinking about Randon's essay, that is a pretty heartbreaking experience, but also like staying with it and asking questions becomes quite delightful. Or a line from Michael's work that the word yeti becomes yet, and that becomes such a delightful word if you just ask it the right questions. So do I think the lyric is better than any other form? I don't think so. For me personally, like I read things with the intent of getting more questions, but I think the lyric just offers you a different way to get there, by offering you both the idea of structure, so it feels really safe, and then saying like nothing is truly safe. Yeah.
Thank you, Eric. Who's next?
Well, I can answer that question a little bit, I think. It amuses me to a great extent that I'm in contact with these people still. And the fact that I'm in touch with them through things like Facebook and Instagram makes it feel shallow on so many levels. First of all, because the medium itself, there is an element of shallowness inherent, right, in terms of what we project on social media. And then I also have to ask myself, what am I gaining by staying in touch with these people? They were not my best friends when I was a kid. So what is it that I'm gaining now when I'm not 12 anymore? And again, I don't have an answer to that. I think every time I go onto Facebook now and there are whatever number of friend requests, my initial reaction is, no, I don't know any of you. I don't want to be friends with any of you. But then the people I am friends with in quotes, again, I mean, how often am I really doing, being a good friend to them? How often am I checking in? How often am I asking them the kinds of questions friends should ask of each other? So I think part of it stems from this sort of wondering and asking myself, questioning my own shallowness in this. And also, to an extent, I'm wondering what kind of fathers and husbands these men have become. So I think it's these two questions that were at the root of it when I was writing this essay.
Thank you. Randon?
I really love what Eric said about kind of the tension that a lyric essay can offer between the safety of the form and yet almost the danger or the wide openness. Maybe it's kind of an agoraphobia of the questioning. And I think a lot of lyric essays can walk that line carefully and to good purpose. But I think too that lyric essays do invite a little bit more questioning than a traditional essay. And I'm putting that in quotes because what even is a traditional essay, but perhaps a more narrative essay or a more expository essay that's really working to explain as it goes, to have the reader follow a clear path of thought along with the writer to get to a particular end. It doesn't have to be the end all be all. It can still end openly, but usually there's a little bit more guidance along the way. But I think in a lot of lyric essays, we rely on the reader's intuition and trust in the writing to make some associative leaps with us. And we also have to trust our own writing to allow the reader to make connections that maybe we're not fully in control of, because we are leaving those spaces, those segments, that space between two parts, hoping the reader makes it to the next part in the way we envision. But I find in reading lyric essays aloud, a lot of times people will see something that I had no intention of putting in the essay, but is brilliant. I'm so glad that it's somehow in there, even if it wasn't exactly my plan. And that also, I think, is one of the pleasures of the lyric essay, is how they can surprise not only the readers, but sometimes the writers of them as well.
Thank you, Randon. Michael, you want to round us out?
Sure. I was just nodding my head to everything Randon was saying. I mean, I do think one of the points that Randon's really lovely comments bring up is that I do think maybe the lyric essay requires a certain type of reader as well. A reader who is willing to dwell in uncertainty and mystery, maybe multiplicity, more than a reader who goes to of an argumentative or an expository essay where things are going to be explained and delineated very carefully, step by step. And that's part of the reason why I love a lyric essay, because I can't really write narratives very well. It's hard for me to sustain a narrative over time, and maybe that's because I'm a poet. And there are narrative threads and fragments that I think can sustain at least the story elements of a lyric essay. But for me, a lyric essay doesn't need to tell stories in the same way that many other sorts of personal essays or memoir might tell stories. I mean, there's story there, but it's occluded and fragmented, and maybe it pops its head out like every now and then, like a groundhog, but then it sort of goes back underground.
Thank you all for taking on that great question. Michael posed a question for Eric, and I'll read that aloud for the audience. Eric, I'd love to hear more about the expressive power of restraint, staying silent, withholding, as you say in your meditation, in tension with the more literal power of the, in quotes, therapeutic hold, restraining via physical touch, in your essay.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I gave kind of a side eye to the idea of euphemistically calling it therapeutic hold. But when it's done with the correct intention, which I hope it often is, and I know it sometimes is, the therapeutic hold is not to, essentially therapeutic hold is when someone is really violently having an emotional affective reaction, and they are usually escorted to a safer place for them to process that. And the idea of a therapeutic hold is not to say, like, don't have this reaction, don't do these things, but in fact is actually saying, yes, of course you're having this. We also want you to be safe. So we're offering you a space to do that. And I think in a way, the lyric form and poetry really wants to do that for the reader. They're saying, like, we want to break the rules of language because we say it's not enough to sort of capture the tragedy, to capture the trauma, or even to capture the joy. But it's, of course, it's very upsetting and very threatening to have the rules of society broken down. And so in that way, I hope the reader trusts the writer to have their best intentions at heart, to say, like, yes, I'm disrupting things, and I also want to create a very safe space to do that. And I think the lyric form is a really great way to do that, to wholeheartedly as a writer to say, I'm going to present something that is awful, or, so wonderful that it inspires, so much joy that it's uncontainable, that I want to give you a container to explore that safely in, or, to rebel against and then to break out. But my intention here is one of great collaboration.
Thank you, Eric. Eric posed another question for Sayantani. I feel like I gravitate to the lyric because of all the ways I can hide in white space. However, it seems like this space allows you to name things so succinctly. Can you talk about how the lyric allows for direct statements and conclusions?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it ties in a little bit with, Michael, your question about temporality as well within my writing, or within this essay particularly. I think it comes from my great urge that even if I'm writing something that is sort of undefinable like a lyric essay, it should be grounded in a lot of specifics. And that's something I really look for when I'm picking up any kind of writing to read. And I read a wide variety of course, fiction, nonfiction, etc. But I also read a lot of books on science and medicine and those sorts of just different subjects. And I really like things to be very concrete and very specific and devoid of abstraction just because something is called lyric. So I think some of it comes from that. And the other thing is American writers writing in America can get away with a lot of abstraction. that writers from elsewhere cannot when they are writing for an American audience. Because we have to be, I think, that much more clearer. Otherwise, we risk questions such as, oh, I don't know what this strange word means. I don't know what this situation means. I don't know what this food means. And this is not at all to say that, Randon, I was in any which way afraid when I was submitting this essay that you would ask me any such questions. But because I got so many such questions when I was getting my MFA, I think it permanently switched something in my brain that I have to be as concrete as I can. And I think it's only in the last maybe 2 or 3 years that I'm changing that way of thinking. And I'm writing a lot using a lot of Indian words in my writing. And my attitude is back to, you know what, people have the internet, they can look things up. So, but oftentimes, and we all know this, we encounter readers who are resistant towards reading things that are new. And it's helpful to put things in the most digestible form as possible. So I'm trying to break away from that training I feel I had internalized during my MFA and getting away from that kind of writing, which can often be damaging, I think.
It's interesting you said that, because we had some authors on the other night, and one of them talked about rejecting some of the critiques that they received in workshops or in MFA programs, that all of them, I don't know, are not created equal. They don't always seem to, and sometimes they're meant to tear down in a competitive, undermining sense. So I think that's a really interesting way to kind of think about how you're changing and what spurs you to change or consider your own voice and subject.
Right.
We're at the top of the hour, and I'd love to round out this hour with a question that Eric posed to Randon. And I'd also like to thank Randon for making this job so easy, because his questions are not only fantastic and thoughtful and enlightening in and of themselves, that they're like little jewels in and of themselves. I'm looking forward to the answers. So, audience, here's the question for Randon. Randon, there is an interesting parallel between the idea of a hermit crab essay embodying another space and the embodying of a possible alternate future. Can you talk about what about the form appealed to you for this topic?
That's a great question. And I love that you saw the hermit crab and the alternate future as related. That's one of the happy accidents that I don't think I was aware of as I was writing this piece. I knew I wanted to write about this transgressive crush in a non-traditional way. And I had originally thought about it being in the form of a timeline, or sort of the traditional like rising action, climax, falling action structure, because in my experience, at least, a crush is not sustainable. Something breaks it. Either you consummate or you're crushed by it, but it's not infinite. It can't sustain itself. So I liked that idea. And then life happened. I pulled a muscle in my back and I went to WebMD as not a writer, but a human being in pain, trying to figure out, how can I fix this muscle? How can I cure this fast? And as I was reading about the symptoms, as I was reading about self-care, like apply ice or like elevate, I started thinking, oh, this is advice for curing this like torn heart muscle that I have. And I hadn't really thought of the muscle, the heart, opening to someone it shouldn't be open to. And then this was one of those very happy occasions where it felt like the essay almost wrote itself, because using that form, I just felt like I knew exactly what I wanted to do with it at almost every step of the way, including recommended reading. WebMD always has further reading, and it's always terrible. It's always dire. Whatever you're looking up, it's fatal. There's like no hope for you, and you go down these terrible rabbit holes. So I tried to make it a little bit more hopeful at the end. So in this case, unlike perhaps Michael's experience with the constraint, this felt like a container that was sort of just ready and waiting for what I needed to put into it. But I'll say briefly that I think one of the pleasures of the hermit crab form is that it can allow you to explore content that's in some ways messy, either emotionally messy or intellectually messy, because the container is there, so you must fit that content to the container. And so it sort of holds you in check. That's the constraint part in a positive way, so that whatever messiness you're trying to work through is really focused, and hopefully can emerge in something that's both sort of intellectually and emotionally pleasurable for the reader, even if it wasn't so wonderful for the writer themselves to experience.
So I would like to give the closeout to Randon, since she started us off. And I'd just like to thank you all for really what's been a masterclass, philosophical, epistemological, really poetic. And this has been a discussion that I hope you all get an offer from the masterclass people. So Randon, I'll turn it back over to you.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you all for reading. Thank you for contributing to this project. Thank you, of course, to Malaprops for hosting us. I encourage you to check out a copy of A Harp in the Stars. The conversation actually continues there, because in addition to the lyric essays I put together, there's a section of craft essays that are, this is my favorite description, lyric essays about lyric essays. And then because I think lyric essays really are difficult to define, in the back of the book, there's a series of meditations where each contributor gets to talk about what they think the lyric essay is, or how their essay came to be, or how it relates to other forms of writing. So mine is certainly not the only voice in this, but all the contributors talk a little bit about what the lyric essay is, means to them, and what it can do, what it can reach for. So thank you again for just a fabulous set of readings and conversation. What a tonic. I'm invigorated. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Good night.